that African people are owed $4.1 trillion. Let me say that again. That African people are owed $4.1 trillion from stolen labor in the U.S. alone. That doesn't include Jamaica. That doesn't include Belize. That doesn't include England. That doesn't include South America. The chairman founded the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement in 1991 as a revolutionary mass organization to defend the democratic rights of the African working class. Last year, the party launched Black Stars Industries, bringing all of the economic development institutions of the party under one umbrella, creating partnerships with community members. Today, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, as the leader of the African Socialist International, speaks to his growing base around the world and leads the worldwide movement for the liberation of African and African people. My people, Jamaica, the world. Let me hear you say Uhuru Sasa again for Baba Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, 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 Uhuru.
Uhuru. First of all, I'd like to offer my deepest and most profound respect to Sister Kabu and Brother Rahul and Mutabaruka. I'd also like to express my appreciation to Irie FM Radio for making this visit possible. And I want to offer a special statement of appreciation to Prof. I and the Rasta brothers and sisters who deepened the welcome here beyond comparison. And a special appreciation to Rasta. We recognize that one of the reasons that we're having this discussion today about Marcus Garvey and about Africa is because Rasta, despite all the persecution and murder that you withstood, made it possible for us to be here and have this discussion. Jah! I'd like to thank you for sharing your hospitality and your welcome to me, to my companion, traveling companion, Brother Bruce here, Brother Alex Morley, who is someplace out in the crowd, who is the representative of our movement for the Caribbean, who traveled here from Nassau. I would also like to say that I bring you greetings from the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party and from its parent organization and the leader of the Uhuru movement, the African Socialist International. From the United Kingdom, from those Africans in Sweden and Luxembourg and Norway and France and Germany and Europe, and from Kenya, South Africa, Senegal, Sierra Leone in Africa, and from throughout the U.S. and Canada in North America. We are here today to celebrate the work and the legacy of the most significant leader in modern history. That is Marcus Garvey. We are here to declare that despite the persecution, the slander and imprisonment of Garvey by a host of governments and people, Garvey lives. His enemies our enemies have failed, and we are determined to carry on the mission that he began more than 100 years ago. First of all, it is important for us to understand the work of Garvey in the context of today's world. When the deep and profound crisis of white power imperialism is visible for everybody to see. When the decline of white power, especially as represented by the United States, has led to a state of permanent warfare where innocent children, women, and men are being bombed by U.S. drones in Afghanistan, Iraq, and North Africa, where Palestinian Arabs are being slaughtered in their homes by Zionist thugs, where the rush to drive Africa into deeper despair by European bandits is becoming more desperate, as they are now faced with Chinese competitors who are proving to be their predatory equals. And where your brothers and sisters are being stalked and slaughtered by whites in the U.S. that claims to be the most civilized representatives of white power democracy. This is not the natural order of things. The world and our condition have not always been like this. To understand the work of Garvey and our responsibility to change our condition, to understand our collective task and assignment, we must destroy all the myths we have been fed in the past about the supremacy of white civilization and about our own inherent inferiority. When we met white people, they lived under a system called feudalism, which was the next closest thing to slavery, where they were impoverished and without any rights at all. And I think it's important to mention this because what we have been taught is that white people, Europeans, came to Africa, came to the Americas because they had a surplus of civilization and Christianity that they just had to share with the rest of the world. We've been taught that it was the beneficence of Europe and white power and white people that is responsible for their presence in Africa and in what this area of the Americas is now called. But the truth of the matter is that white people lived under despotism, poverty, and disease. When we met white people, they lived under feudalism, a system that lasted for 1,000 years, where white people lived in sometimes state of absolute nakedness because they had nothing to wear, where much of what they earned, some of what they earned, I should say, went to themselves, but the vast majority of what they earned went to the nobility, to the landlords. The majority of the people were serfs and peasants who worked for the nobility. This is where you get the myth of Robin Hood, running around and robbing the rich to give money to the poor. And Europeans lived in a severe state of poverty. Between the 4 years of 1347 and 1351, half the white people on the planet Earth died of plague. They call it the Black Plague, but we had nothing to do with it. The plague was so serious that you cannot have any kind of meaningful economic life if half the population dies within 4 short years. And then for the next 100 years, that and other plagues wiped out much of Europe. It was so desperate that even the Pope, who claimed to have a special relationship with God, left the Vatican to try and find some place where no other human beings were living because he didn't want to meet God. He didn't want to meet the Jesus that he talked about so much in person. The plague was serious. Dogs died, cows died, horses died. Husbands died, and their wives left them where they lay because she was afraid to catch the plague herself. So this was the Europe that claims to have come out to rescue us, when the reality is it was poverty and disease and desperation that pushed Europe, these people we call Europeans, out of Europe and into the rest of the world. How did Europe rescue itself from this state of poverty and oppression? First of all, it's really important for us to get a grip on this, because all of us have been fed fantasies that they call history to explain this to us. They sometimes tell us that Europeans left Europe because they wanted to find spices, and I believe there's some truth in that. But you must think about this. At the same time, they claim, and it was true, that white people did not know the world was round, where they assumed there was a possibility that they might actually sail off the earth. They would travel for months on the water, threatened by the possibility to sail off the earth looking for nutmeg. If that's not poverty, I don't know what is. So Europe was caught up in poverty and despair. And it was the slave trade. It was the attack on Africa itself, the war on Africa itself, that began the process of rescuing Europe. It was an attack on these lands here that were inhabited by an indigenous population that had never seen a white man before. It was a consequence of this attack where resources began to leave, going back to Europe. It was the attack on China in 1841 and 42 that they called the Opium War, fought by England against China because China refused to trade tea with the British for opium. The Chinese did not want opium, and the British fought a war to force the Chinese to give them tea for opium and turn China into a nation of junkies, of drug addicts. This is that tea-sipping, civilized England that is always preaching to the rest of us. That England is sipping tea because it fought a war against China. There are no tea tree leaves in London. They didn't get that from London. They went into China and fought a war. So here you have a situation where a group of people who live in what we now call Europe, a concept that did not even exist until the 17th century. You must understand this. There was no such thing that was generally understood as Europe until the 17th century. Prior to then, the people who occupied that land identified themselves primarily in relationship to each other. The Normans, the Goths, the Saxons, the rest of them. And they existed in a state of ongoing tribal warfare. What united this group of people was the war that they began on Africa and the war they began on the rest of the world that transformed all of Europe, so that now we are poor and Europe is rich. We are oppressed and Europe is free. Europe got its freedom and got its wealth through a parasitic relationship relationship that it imposed on the rest of us, on Africa, on the rest of us. So now, instead of this fragmented group of tribes constantly at war with each other, they have united in pursuit of slavery, loot from piracy, thuggish colonialism. Now you have the emergence of a sense of sameness among white people resting upon an economic base of exploitation and oppression. That is what you call a nation. You see the emergence of the European nation at the expense of the consolidation of Africa, the Americas, and other peoples around the world. It's really important for us to understand that. And this sense of sameness is consolidated. It rests upon a foundation of an economic system, a social system that they refer to as capitalism. Capitalism, a dog-eat-dog system that needs exploitation in order to exist. It is a parasitic social system. Would be no capitalism if there had been no slavery. Slavery was the first big business in the world. It was the slave trade. It was the trade in black people, your parents and my parents, that united the world into a single world economy. That was a precondition for the rise of capitalism, a blood-sucking social system that continues to challenge the existence of everybody in the world today. So, there was a time when there were all these different group of people that have now become white people. We invented the white man. White man didn't even exist before the 17th century. Europe didn't even exist before the 17th century. It's important for us to understand this, brothers, because they would convince us that it is they who brought civilization to us, when the truth is we were building pyramids before white people learned to master fire. But it was the war on Africa and the rest of the world that is responsible for the loss of self-confidence in African people ourselves. Here we are, the giants that brought human civilization to the planet, now find ourselves living under the worst kind of oppression. I grew up as a child, like everybody in this meeting had to have grown up, looking out unto the world. And every place I looked in the world, when I saw somebody who looked like me, they were starving, they were oppressed, they were conferred, they had violence and ignorance imposed on their lives. And the explanation, the only explanation I got, the same explanation you got, is that the reason Africans live like this as compared to the white people is because the white people were more civilized. They had civilization and we had none. That's what we got taught in their institutions, in their colonial institutions. They taught us that the white people had wealth and resources because they were thrifty and we didn't save our money. This is the lie that has been imposed on us. And they use the fact that white power dominates the world, even if shakily at this moment, as evidence of their superiority and our inferiority. And we say that the only thing the white domination of the world proves in terms of superiority is that they have been superior killers. They have been superior thugs. They have been superior rapists. They have been superior pirates. They have traveled the world and brought death and destruction everywhere they have gone. Everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. So here, we have a social system, an entire social system, this thing called capitalism, born through selling our grandparents, born through the massacre, the destruction of the Taino people here, born through killing and murdering people around the world. In the United States, there are some concentration camps that they euphemistically refer to as Indian reservations. Nobody even speaks about the people. If they're not in the room, they have been forgotten. They have been pushed out of life, out of history by European imperialist white power, parasitic white power. They created an economy, a world economy. It wasn't a Jamaican economy. It wasn't a U.S. economy. It wasn't a French or German economy. It was a world economy. The world economy, capitalism emerged as a world economy, and capitalism emerged as the rise and birth of white power in the world. Capitalism must be destroyed. White power must be destroyed. African people must be free. Must be free. So once upon a time, you had all these different groups living in Europe. The Celts, the Goths, the Saxons, the whole host of others of them. And then they became consolidated into a single nation as a consequence of enslaving us, as a consequence of driving us apart. White solidarity is based on the attack on the solidarity of Africans and other people around the world. So now, you look at our condition, brothers and sisters. Look at what's happening in the world today. The peoples of the world are rising up against this parasitic relationship. Increasingly, this is the reason for the crisis, the economic crisis that white power is experiencing today. Not because somebody knew the correct prayers, but because the people of the world are rising up to take back the resources that white power has taken from us. People are fighting back. It's just that simple. And that's why America and Europe are in a state of permanent warfare. That's why Obama, this boot-licking, white power in blackface, white power in blackface. That's why Obama is droning people in Afghanistan and Iraq and in North Africa. And that's why he's presiding over a situation where every day you look up, a new murder of African people is occurring by the police of white people in the United States of America. The people are rising up. And as a consequence of the people rising up, the whole economic system is being destabilized. This is not the first time something like this has happened. Europeans now struggling with each other, struggling with competitors to see who's going to get what part of Africa. You know, the first imperialist war that they call World War I was a war to redivide the world among white people. The white imperialists, the colonizers who had carved up our Africa, carved up all of what they refer to as the Middle East, and put themselves in charge. With the first imperialist world war they call World War I, they fought because some of them were dissatisfied with the portion of the world they had. They didn't have enough black people under their domain. They didn't have enough Arabs under their domain. They weren't able to get enough resources from the Middle East and from the Americas, etc. So like any group of gangsters, they went to war with each other to redivide the world. And in this process, they created an organization that was called the League of Nations. It was a precursor to this organization that's called the United Nations today. And while they were in their meetings in the League of Nations, debating who was going to get what part of Africa, it was Marcus Garvey who stood up and said, Africa for Africans, those at home and those abroad. In the middle of that crisis, it's important for us to understand that he didn't say Africa for Jamaicans. He didn't say Africans for Afro-Germans. He said Africa for Africans, those at home and those abroad. It is because Garvey understood quite clearly that we are one Africa. Can you say that? If I say one Africa, will you say one nation? One Africa. One Africa. If I say one nation, will you say one Africa? One nation. One nation. One Africa. One nation. Uhuru. This is what Garvey understood and fought for. It wasn't just a pipe dream for Garvey. Garvey began to organize to make it a reality, because the discussion is nothing unless you are prepared to do something about it. You must be prepared to change the world, and Garvey had the confidence in himself and the confidence in us to understand that we can change this world. The world we live in, the conditions we experience, is a world and conditions which were created by human beings. Human beings can change this. This is one of the things that distinguish humans from other animals. Humans have consciousness. Humans have consciousness. A cow is similar to humans in certain biological aspects. But a cow goes to a McDonald's for a different reason than you, if you're dumb enough to go to McDonald's. A cow doesn't make a choice to go to McDonald's. You and the cow often go to McDonald's before you understand what Ross been talking about in terms of what you should be eating, right? You and the cow go to McDonald's, but the cow didn't make that decision. And we made the decision. As bad as the decision may have been, we made the decision. And this is the thing that distinguishes us as human beings. We say that this world is a world that we can change. We can create a world that meets our needs as a people. We can create a world so that we know that our children will have a future, not because we are praying for a good white man or a good Negro to get elected this time, but because we take the future of our children in our own hands, in our own hands. But you can't wish this into existence. Look at Africa, the richest continent on earth in terms of natural resources. 12 million square miles of wealth. Look at Africans, the most impoverished group of people on the planet Earth. It doesn't make any sense. Here we have a situation where, because Garvey's mission has not been completed, we are in a contest with all kinds of forces. Increasingly, we see the U.S. and China in a contest because China is the fastest growing economy in our Africa. Africa is the birthright of every living black person on the planet Earth. China and the U.S. are engaged in a contest for Africa. China, which white people used to laugh at. China, that white people used to say when they wanted to say something negative about human beings, about your lack of chances, they say, you don't have a Chinaman's chance. They don't say that about China today. China has become a great power. And it is in the process of gobbling up our Africa, gobbling up Jamaica too. But you look at China and compare it to Africa. China doesn't have a tenth of the resources that Africa has. But when England deals with China, it deals with one China. When France deals with China, it deals with one China. When Belgium deals with China, it deals with one China. But when they deal with our Africa, they deal with 54 different Africas. Which means you can't have a national economy. They have created these colonies. The white people got together. The ones that named my father Waller. They got together in Berlin in 1884 and 85 in order to keep themselves from going to war. At this time, over Africa, they carved it up. And they gave each of the white countries a part of our Africa. Not for us, but for them. And because of that, you don't have a national economy. They control our economy. Because of that, they have imposed a sense of a false national consciousness on our brains. When we met the white man, we were Africans. He comes and carves Africa up. And now we identified by these territories that he created. Think about it. You have a place in West Africa that's called Cameroon. It's called Cameroon because the Portuguese, when they arrived there, they found a lot of shrimp. Cameroon comes from the Portuguese word for shrimp. So you got a lot of Africans running around calling themselves shrimp. But they are not shrimp, they are Africans. Look at the place in Nigeria that likes to pose as the mighty Nigeria. Was no such place as Nigeria. A man named Frederick Lugard was sent by the British, the same British that colonized us here, enslaved and colonized us here, sent this man named Frederick Lugard to deal with two separate territories that the British claimed as their own at gunpoint. And in 1903, when they had to pull the two territories together into one administrative entity, they had to come up with a name for it. Lugard's mistress at the time, who later became his wife, her name was Flora Shaw. She came up with a name for the territories, nigger area. Nigeria comes from the word nigger areas. We are not nigger Aryans. We are Africans. We are Africans. But there has been a false national consciousness imposed on us. And this is something that we really have to come to terms with, brothers and sisters. So we see a world that's fraught with violence, turbulence, decline of white power everywhere you look. U.S. can't bully anybody anymore. Used to be able to tell Venezuelans what to do. Venezuelans say, we do it our way. Used to be able to tell the people in Iran, do it this way. The Iranians say, that's not the way it's going to be. Used to be able to successfully occupy territories like Afghanistan and Iraq. But the people are fighting back everywhere. Everywhere the people are fighting back. And so you see economic crisis because this is a parasite that sucks the blood of the peoples of the world, and every parasite must have a host. So when you're dealing with a parasite, I don't know which parasite has been most pronounced in this area, but when I grew up, it used to be a thing called a tapeworm. And that was really true for people who ate that old horrible meat. And you get a tapeworm inside you. And the tapeworm, no matter how much you eat, you can't get any bigger. Tapeworm in you gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It just latches onto your intestines. You can't talk that tapeworm out. You can't say a prayer to make that tapeworm leave. And if the tapeworms voted, you couldn't vote the tapeworm out of there. Because if the tapeworm leaves, it dies. And that's the parasite that we are dealing with. We are dealing with an economic and social parasite that's called capitalism and white power. it must, as a condition for its success, it must continue to suck the blood of the peoples of the earth. It must do that. And if we're going to get rid of it, we're going to have to do just what you have to do to get rid of a tapeworm. You're going to have to use some revolutionary medicine. And you take some revolutionary medicine and you can flush the tapeworm down the toilet of history. That's what we have a responsibility to do with this predator that's been feasting off the blood of African people for the last 600 years. So, brothers and sisters, there are not going to be any exceptions for us. We're going to have to do just like everybody else has had to do to win freedom. Look around the world that we live in. 80% of the people on the planet Earth are trying to survive off $10 US or less a day. 50% of the people on the planet Earth are trying to survive off $2.50 or less a day. And if you're in Africa, you're lucky if you get $1 a day to survive on. People work all day just to get a meal in our Africa. Where did this come from? Not from some ignorance of Africans. We taught them agriculture. We taught them the sciences and what have you. It has come as a consequence of somebody else taking control of our Africa and our lives. They are not going to give it up. We are going to have to take it back. It's going to take the same thing to get out of this situation that it took to put us into this situation. Marcus Garvey understood that clearly. That's why he organized Africans all around the world. Because the reality is this, that our struggle has run into its limitations wherever it's located. Whenever it's fought within the context of the borders that white power created for us. Whether it is Ghana that they call today, whether it is Senegal, there is not going to be a Senegalese revolution. It's going to be an African revolution. The fact is that we have to have a Senegalese front of the African revolution. There has to be a Ghana front of the African revolution. There has to be a Jamaican front of the African revolution. We are in this thing together. One Africa. One Africa. So, organization is fundamental, and that's what Garvey understood more clearly than anything else. When Garvey put so much emphasis on organization, he understood that the most significant organizational struggle that we're involved in is the African nation itself. The nation that has been dispersed against our will across the globe. The nation that has produced value for everybody except ourselves. Africa must be united. And the Europeans, imperialists, and the Chinese, and the Turks, and the Indians, and everybody else that's sucking the blood of Africa, we are going to have to fight to free our Africa. We are going to have to build different fronts all over the planet Earth. Uhuru. That's what I'm about. Like Marcus Garvey, I find it absolutely impossible to accept a situation where anybody, any human beings on the planet should govern Africans except ourselves. Nobody should dominate the Africans. We have to be involved in self-determination. We have to find it unacceptable that anybody else should govern us except ourselves. And even when I say ourselves, I don't mean some puppet Negro that has been put in power or with the structures that capitalism and colonialism created for us. Look at South Africa. All the people split all around the world stood up, wanted to see what they thought was free South Africa. And that lick-spittle African National Congress, yes, it's a lick-spittle, butt-kissing, vomit-eating organization that came to power. And in South Africa, you go to South Africa today, you have a situation where less than 10% of the population, white people, own 87% of the land. They own land 4.5 times larger than England and Northern Ireland combined under the African National Congress. And what those Negroes do is they get their cut from the top, and the rest of us catch hell. That's in South Africa. You saw them gun down those miners who were just trying to get higher wages. They should have been trying to take the damn mines, but they just wanted to get paid more for getting the gold out for the white people. And that was too much for the Negroes who gunned them down. Why? Because you cannot use your oppressor's state apparatus to serve you. It will not serve you. It's got to be destroyed and has to be replaced by our own state power. I just want to say this. Brothers and sisters, I don't know how they talk about it here, but in the United States, they want to convince African people that we're in some kind of struggle against racism. I don't even know what the hell a racism is. How does it taste? How does it look? When do you know you won the battle? Does somebody come out and wave a white flag and say we surrender? Does racism come out and surrender? No. The reality is that we are dominated all over the world, African people, by colonialism, where a foreign and hostile entity has assumed responsibility and control over our lives, either directly or indirectly, with neo-colonial, bootlicking, white power in black faces. It will not serve us. It will not serve us. So, brothers and sisters, I'm on a mission. I'm working for Marcus Garvey. I'm working for Marcus Garvey. My objective is to build a revolutionary movement stretching across the globe of black people, African people who want to be free. Who want to be free. And one of the most important tasks that we have before us, we have to organize. And then we have to create a revolutionary ideology so that we know what the hell it is we are struggling for. Because our enemies have us struggling against our own interests too often. I met a wonderful young sister at a museum here a couple of days ago. Her name is Michelle. She said she was going to be here. And Michelle taking me through the museum. I guess it's a Taino. Is that what it's called, the Taino Museum? She says, when I'm talking to her about Africans uniting, she says, I don't believe it. Africans will never unite. We will never be able to be free. And the reason she doesn't believe it is because she doesn't know what put us in this situation. If she knew what put us in the situation, then she could read the signs. She can see the decline of white power right before her very eyes and know what it is that she's looking at. But she can't. So ideology is really important. Educating the masses, a hardcore of revolutionaries. Everybody's not going to be a revolutionary, and that's all right. But if you can't be a revolutionary, you got the responsibility to support the revolution, whether you can be a revolution yourself. We have to create any people, any oppressed people that ever won his freedom had to first create a revolutionary organization of steel cadre who may have been school teachers, bus drivers, bricklayers, lawyers as occupations, but their profession was revolution. Revolution. We have to have an international organization of professional revolutionaries. That way, we bring into reality one Africa, one nation. Not as a slogan, but as a reality. I want to leave you with one other slogan. Maybe two, if you don't mind. We always open up our meetings with uhuru. You call our office any place on earth. Call our office in the Bahamas. They would answer the phone and say uhuru. Call our office in London. They would say uhuru. Call our office in Stockholm. They would say uhuru. We say uhuru because it is Swahili for freedom. It is Swahili for freedom. It was introduced to the world through the Kenyan Land Freedom Army that they call Mau Mau, led by Dedan Kimathi, who fought the British, the same British that was terrorizing us here. The Mau Mau fought them to a standstill for many years in Kenya. So So we believe that uhuru should be on the minds of African people 24 hours a day. When I come and greet you, I will say uhuru. When I leave you, I will say uhuru. When you call me on the phone, I will say uhuru. And I want to say to you again, uhuru. The Europeans have been too successful. It sounds like I'm speaking to a Catholic audience here. I believe we can do better than that. So we say uhuru. Uhuru! Let me just leave you with another. Since we are dabbling in languages from the homeland, there is a call and response. I say Israelite too. It means the land is ours. You say E Africa. I say E Africa. You say Israelite too. Together it means Africa is our land. It is Zulu. Can you work with that? Israelite too. Israelite too. Israelite too. Africa. One Africa. One Africa. One nation. Uhuru.
Uhuru! 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 And we not stop fight till we get where we want and what is ours.